On June 7, 1944, the day after D-Day, a largely overlooked but critical battle unfolded in Normandy, involving two volunteer regiments from the Canadian 3rd Division, 9th Infantry Brigade, the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, known as the North Novas, and the 27th Canadian Armoured Regiment, the Sherbrooke Fusiliers, supported by volunteers from the Camerons of Ottawa and forward observers from the 14th Field Regiment. Despite its relative obscurity in the grand narrative of World War II, the battle played a crucial role in preventing a German counterattack that could have split the Allied landing forces along the beaches, jeopardizing the entire invasion. The Canadian role in Normandy during D-Day was remarkable in that the entire force was voluntary. Canada had no conscription at the time, and its military numbered over 400,000 men and women, though only about 100,000 were part of the 1st Canadian Army preparing for Operation Overlord. The Canadian beachhead, codenamed Juno, stretched for 5 miles along the Normandy coast, from Bernier-sur-Mer through Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, Grey-sur-Mer, and ending at Courseulles-sur-Mer. Juno was the responsibility of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division under Major General R.F.L. Rodkeller, whose mandate extended beyond the initial capture of the beach. His forces were to push inland and disrupt German defenses further south. To coordinate the landing and inland advance, Juno Beach was divided into 2 sectors, Mike and Nan, which were further split into subsectors to allow precise landing and movement. The 9th Infantry Brigade, also known as the Highland Brigade under Brigadier D.G. Ben Cunningham, had been designated a reserve formation but was thrust into assault duty on D+1, landing on the eastern flank of the Canadian push. Their mission required them to follow up the initial assaults of the 7th and 8th Brigades, moving past those units to strike deeper into German-held territory. The 3 RD Division's operational plan outlined 3 objectives, known as Lines U, Elm, and Oak. For the North Novas and Sherbrooke Fusiliers, the goal of Objective Oak was to spearhead the advance southward toward Caen, securing the Carpiquet airfield and preparing to respond to an expected German counterattack. Beyond these formal instructions, the brigade was expected to coordinate with the British 3rd Division to the east and the Canadian 7th Brigade to the west, forming a unified spearhead to penetrate further inland. The success of this plan depended heavily on factors outside Canadian control, particularly the British failure to capture Caen on D-Day, which left the Canadian 9th Brigade's eastern flank dangerously exposed. As they advanced toward Carpiquet, the Canadians had to fight through heavily defended German villages such as Vions-les-Buissons, Buron, Authie, and Franqueville, all while remaining wary of the 21st Panzer Division, the sole operational German armored force in the area, which threatened to exploit any gap in their advance. Every decision and maneuver had to account for both immediate tactical objectives and the broader strategic goal of maintaining a continuous, defensible spearhead. Though often forgotten in the broader D-Day narrative, the battle fought by the North Novas and the Sherbrooke Fusiliers on June 7 was instrumental in keeping the German counterattack contained, ensuring the Allies could maintain their hard-won beachheads and continue their push into occupied France. As the 7th and 8th Brigades battled their way through the treacherous sands and fortified positions of Juno Beach, the commander of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, Major General R.F.L. Rodkeller, found himself aboard the converted merchant vessel HMS Hillary, now serving as a D-Day command cruiser, struggling to interpret a flood of conflicting reports from the front lines. German resistance, scattered Allied units, and chaotic beach conditions made every decision critical, and Keller faced a pivotal choice. Where should he order the 9th Brigade to land? The original plan called for a split landing, with parts of the brigade touching down at Bernier-sur-Mer and Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, while an alternate plan suggested Courseulles-sur-Mer as the landing site. It was not until the naval authorities reported that Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer had been closed due to intense enemy fire that Keller reluctantly directed the entire brigade to concentrate at Bernier-sur-Mer, a constricted stretch of sand known as the Nan-White sector, whose narrow exits were already clogged with troops and equipment from the 8th Brigade. Vehicles, from light bicycles intended to speed infantry movement on country roads to heavy trucks and tanks, jammed the beach, though the bicycles quickly proved more liability than asset, making easy targets for German snipers. Meanwhile, the men of Brig General D.G. Ben Cunningham's 9th Brigade waited tensely for their orders. According to the North Nova Scotia Highlanders War Diary, 3 to 6 June 1944, at 0630 hours all wireless sets were on listening watch, monitoring the progress of the assault battalions, and by 11 a.m. the long-anticipated orders came through: the brigade was to land. With the assembly area at Benny-sur-Mer, code-named Elder, already targeted for capture by the 8th Brigade, the 9th Brigade's mission was to push inland immediately once the 8th secured the village. Though the precise time of Benny-sur-Mer's capture is uncertain, it was reportedly taken around noon by C Company of Le Régiment de la Chaudière, a French-Canadian unit from Quebec serving under the 8th Brigade. The 9th Brigade touched the shore as part of the second wave of landings, with the North Nova Scotia Highlanders leading the way. Conflicting reports make the exact times difficult to pinpoint, but evidence suggests the North Novas began landing near Bernier-sur-Mer around 11:40 a.m., when the narrow beach was already densely packed with men and material from the 8th Brigade. By 12:05 p.m., 9th Brigade headquarters mistakenly reported that the beaches were too crowded and that units were standing off, waiting to land. Yet just 15 minutes later, at 12:20 p.m., communications confirmed that the 9th Brigade had successfully landed and that its units were poised to advance inland toward Elder, ready to link with the 8th Brigade and press the Canadian offensive further into Normandy's contested interior. The landing of the 9th Brigade, executed under intense pressure and amidst logistical chaos, was a decisive step in establishing a continuous front and securing the Allied foothold on D-Day+1. The advance inland from Juno Beach on D-Day+1 was a perilous undertaking for the 9th Canadian Infantry Brigade, and it was not until well into the afternoon that the North Nova Scotia Highlanders and the Sherbrooke Fusiliers were fully ashore. Beach congestion and bottlenecks at the exits delayed the brigade's forward movement, and it wasn't until 4:05 p.m. that these veteran units began their push toward Benny-sur-Mer, the assembly area codenamed Elder. Behind them followed the brigade's other regiments, the Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders and the Highland Light Infantry of Canada, remaining in the assembly zone to provide support as the lead units advanced. By 6:20 p.m., the North Novas and Sherbrooke Fusiliers, acting as the brigade's vanguard, departed from Elder and pressed further into Normandy's contested interior, their path a mixture of farmland, hedgerows, and bombed-out villages. At the forefront of this advance was the Sherbrooke Fusiliers Reconnaissance Troop, riding in Stuart light tanks powered by Cadillac V8 engines, agile but lightly armored and ill-equipped for heavy combat. They were followed closely by C Company of the North Novas, mounted on the regiment's carrier platoon vehicles, with machine gun support from C Company of the Cameron Highlanders of Ottawa, who, as the only Ottawa unit to land on D-Day, provided crucial suppressive fire for the brigade's movement. The Camerons, acting in a divisional reserve role, were spread across company and platoon levels, giving essential machine gun and mortar support to infantry units throughout the campaign. Behind them, a troop of M10 tank destroyers from the 3rd Anti-Tank Regiment, built on the American M4 Sherman chassis, brought heavier firepower, followed by the remainder of the North Nova Support Company and an advance guard riding atop Sherbrooke Fusilier tanks. Together, this ad hoc mixed force of roughly 300 men represented the spearhead of the brigade's inland push. However, riding on a Sherman tank was a gamble with life itself. 3/4 of the 27th Armored Regiment's battle tanks were M4 Sherman Mk 330-ton medium tanks, which were inadequately armored and outgunned compared to the formidable German Panther and Tiger tanks. Even more threatening were the 88mm German guns, originally anti-aircraft weapons adapted to destroy tanks and infantry with deadly precision, earning a fearsome reputation in campaigns from North Africa to the Eastern Front. The Sherman's tall profile made them conspicuous targets, and their gasoline engines rendered them highly flammable. One well-placed shot could ignite the tank in a fireball. Trooper L.J. Gilbert of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers captured the soldiers' grim humor and fear, writing, "Their 88s were really terrible. We had nothing like them, and noting how the Germans derisively nicknamed the Shermans Tommy Cookers for their tendency to ignite instantly under fire. Allied troops found similar darkly humorous monikers. British forces had their own nicknames, while Americans referred to the Sherman as a Purple Heartbox or Ronson, the latter after a cigarette lighter famed for lighting first time, every time. Despite the inherent danger, these Canadian and supporting units pressed onward, acutely aware that every yard gained was a step toward breaking German defenses and securing the inland objectives critical to the success of the Normandy campaign. Despite the chaos and danger that marked the D-Day landings, the North Nova Scotia Highlanders and the Sherbrooke Fusiliers pressed relentlessly southward, moving through the perilous French countryside under the constant threat of German mortar and machine gun fire. Their Stuart light tanks, though lightly armored and dangerously exposed, carried them to Vions-les-Buissons, now roughly 4 miles from their next objective, the strategically critical Carpiquet airfield. The Canadians, operating on British double daylight savings time, had ample daylight to continue their advance and potentially seize Carpiquet before nightfall, but their progress was abruptly halted by orders from Lieutenant General Miles C. Dempsey, commander of the British Second Army, under whose operational command the 3rd Canadian Division fell. Dempsey's decision stemmed from reports received around 4 p.m. that a battle group of the 21st Panzer Division, 50 German tanks accompanied by a battalion of infantry, was advancing from Caen toward the vulnerable gap between Juno and Sword Beaches. Acting with caution, Dempsey ordered all assault divisions across Sword, Juno, and Gold Beaches to dig in, unaware that the German force he feared had already been recalled. His directive, issued after 7 p.m. and confirmed to General Keller at 9:15 p.m., reflected the understandable but ultimately misplaced concern that Canadian forces might overextend their left flank in darkness, exposing themselves to armored counterattacks. Dempsey hoped that by pausing the Canadians, British troops might capture Caen and link with the Canadians to secure the airport at Carpiquet, a hope that would soon prove futile as Caen remained stubbornly in German hands. Following Dempsey's orders, General Cunningham commanded the North Novas and Sherbrooke Fusiliers, acting as the brigade's vanguard, to halt and establish defensive positions on the high ground near the crossroads of Annecy and Vions-les-Buissons. Night fell, leaving these 2 regiments isolated. The remainder of the 9th Brigade was still encamped at the Benny-sur-Mer assembly area, unable to reinforce the forward units. The soldiers endured a tense, sleepless night, alert to every sound and movement in the darkness, with fear and anticipation gnawing at their resolve. Sergeant T.C. Reed of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers later described the grim vigil. "What a bastard of a night! No time for sleep, no time to eat, no time for anything but looking into the dark and wondering what's ahead." Skirmishes with scattered German stragglers punctuated the uneasy night, a reminder that danger lurked even after the day's main battles. By the close of D-Day, approximately 14,000 Canadian troops had successfully landed on Juno Beach, a remarkable feat that underscored the skill and determination of the Canadian forces. The North Novas and Sherbrooke Fusiliers had penetrated farther into France than any other Allied units, establishing a tenuous foothold deep in enemy territory. Yet, despite this achievement, they were unaware of the precariousness of their position. The seemingly successful day masked the peril and uncertainty that awaited them in the hours to come, a danger that would test their courage, endurance, and resolve to an even greater degree on the following day. On D+1, June 7, 1944, the North Nova Scotia Highlanders and the Sherbrooke Fusiliers were about to confront one of the most fanatical and feared units in the German army, the 12th SS Panzer Division's Panzergrenadier Regiment 25, composed almost entirely of Hitler Youth soldiers between 16 and 18 years old. D-Day had caught the German High Command unprepared. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, responsible for defending Normandy, was away celebrating his wife's birthday in Germany, and General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger of the 21st Panzer Division was allegedly visiting his mistress in Paris. Hitler himself, convinced by Allied deception that the invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais, did not wake until noon, only then to belatedly release 3 Panzer divisions, the 12th SS, the Panzerlehr, and the 21st Panzer, toward the battlefront. Among these, the 12th SS Panzergrenadier Regiment 25 became notorious as the Hitler Youth or Boy Soldiers, forming part of a unit some dubbed the Baby Division, and others the Murder Division. These adolescent soldiers, though young, were highly trained, ideologically indoctrinated, and fiercely loyal, guided by officers drawn from Hitler's elite Leibstandard SS Adolf Hitler Regiment. Their commander, the ruthless and fanatical SS Standartenführer Kurt Panzermeier, epitomized Nazi arrogance and brutality, famously instructing his troops that their last bullet was meant for themselves rather than for capture. Despite their youth, the regiment was a disciplined and lethal fighting force. Meier's boys had been ordered to remain south of Lisieux until Hitler personally authorized their deployment, which delayed their arrival in the Caen sector until late on D-Day, having spent hours hiding in roadside ditches to evade Allied air attacks. Their arrival coincided with careful planning by the German High Command, a counterattack for D+1 intended to crush the Canadian advance. The 21st Panzer Division would move east of Caen, while west of the city the 12th SS and Panzer Lehr Divisions would push into the Canadian beachhead, sever it, and drive the Allies back into the sea. Meier, with chilling pride, recalled past Canadian setbacks at Dieppe and vowed to throw those little Canadian fishes into the sea, highlighting the lethal intent behind the German strategy. Even as the reality of D-Day made clear that Caen would not fall immediately, the Canadian command pressed on. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's orders remained firm. The Canadians were to continue their inland advance despite the lack of progress in capturing Caen. At 6:45 a.m. on D+1, Brigadier Ben Cunningham relayed the directive to the North Novas and Sherbrooke Fusiliers, instructing them to resume their advance as soon as preparations were complete. The two regiments moved out in the same formation as the previous day, pushing resolutely toward Vions-les-Buissons, a small town situated northwest of Buron and Authie. They were navigating a landscape of danger and uncertainty, fully aware that they might face both the hardened Hitler Youth and experienced German armored units, yet committed to their mission of securing critical positions in the Normandy interior. Their advance was not just a tactical maneuver but a test of courage against an enemy whose indoctrinated youth and fanaticism made them uniquely ruthless adversaries. The North Novas and Sherbrooks, seasoned by D-Day's harrowing landings, now faced the grim task of turning back the boy soldiers and continuing the relentless push inland, setting the stage for the next intense engagements in Normandy.